Welcome, everybody, to the TreeLines podcast. I'm Paul Jeffries. I'm your host, and today we are visiting with Greg Hay, former colleague that has eased his way into retirement. Hello, Greg. Would you give us a little bit about your background?
Hey, thank you for having me, Paul. I guess I began my career in forestry with a job with the U.S. Forest Service in Washington State, member of the Regional Reinforcement Fire Suppression Crew. It's a 20-man crew, synonymous with a hotshot crew today. And we fought fire in Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota. And following that little stint, I earned my degree at Stephen F. Austin State University and immediately went to work for Weyerhaeuser Company in their logging and inventory departments here in Mountain Pine, Arkansas. Following that, I was hired by the U.S. Forest Service as a reforestation forester on the Ouachita National Forest and completed a graded curriculum at Clemson, Mississippi State, and West Virginia universities to earn a certified silviculturist credential. 10 years under my belt with the U.S. Forest Service, I transitioned into sales of all things using my silviculture background. Used a consulting approach in sales to sell herbicides in the forestry, utility rights-of-way, and highway rights-of-way markets. Did that for about 14 years. And then Westvaco recruited me to be director of sales for Forest Technology Group, a new venture division of Westvaco that was promoting a web-based GIS platform on a subscription basis and high-end consulting services like wood basket analysis, harvest scheduling, forest planning, etc. That new venture division lasted about 2 years. I was hired by Cell4 Corporation, Canadian venture that was developing cloned loblolly pine trees and slash pine trees servicing the Southeast. So I covered Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, and Oklahoma selling cloned loblolly pine trees. That venture lasted about 8 years. And after that, I returned to herbicides and selling and servicing the herbicide market before joining ArborGen back in 2020. And after 4 years with ArborGen, I decided it was time for this old pine knot to retire and do some things while I still had the physical ability to complete some bucket list items and create my own consulting firm.
Well, Greg, that sounds like that could be a whole book in itself. You probably need to get started on writing that novel. I wonder, though, would it be an adventure comedy or would it be a horror novel or what?
I'm afraid it would be a slow read, Paul, a very slow read.
Well, it's interesting that you said that you got your certification in silviculture. That's going to be our topic today for our podcast, and we're going to be talking about silviculture, past, present, and future. And just going to delve into some topics, take on some ideas, tackle some myths, and maybe come out of this with a better understanding of the complexity of what makes up silviculture and growing trees. As you know, breaking the word down, silvum is forest and culture is growing trees, silviculture. In your wide career, you've been in silviculture for a long time. Can you talk to us a little bit about the history, where it was when you first started your career, and how it has progressed or evolved?
Well, let's begin with what I define silviculture as. I define it as the science and practice of controlling the establishment, the composition, structure, growth, and quality of forest vegetation. So that's basically silviculture in a nutshell there.
Right.
And that's how I define it. Some people define it as the art and science. I define it as the practice. Getting into the history of silviculture, that's a topic that could take up the entire podcast. Let's just look at it from a North American standpoint and the U.S. As the U.S. got colonized over in the East and those populations began to grow, there was very extensive use of the forest resources out there for food as well as the wood for fuel and tools and boats and bridges, etc. The use of the forest was very extensive. The forest resources were very vast, so there was no thought given to the control or establishment of the forest resources at the time. But as the populations began to expand and move westward, when they got over to the Pacific Ocean, the degradation of the forest resource and the overutilization of the forest resources became very apparent. That's when a fear developed about the loss of that forest resource, and that's where the Federal Forest Service got initiated and where some forest management regulations and legislation began. In the 1950s, there was less than 2 million acres of pine plantations.
Right.
But at the turn of the century, there was over 32 million acres of pine plantations. With the improved natural stands, the unimproved natural stands, and those that were uneven aged and even aged, it probably delivered about a ton of growth per acre per year back then in the early 50s. With that transition from natural regeneration to artificial regeneration, probably increased the productivity by another 2 tons per acre per year. And then as plantation improvements began to develop and come along, and with those advances in tree improvement, site preparation, fertilization, and pest management, productivity increased another 2 tons per acre per year. And then when we moved into very intensely managed plantations in the 80s and early 90s, the increase in productivity increased another 3 tons to the acre. And those increases in productivity came from things like your nutrition, your genetics, advancements in vegetation control. That also played a big part of it. But tree improvement, nutrition, vegetation management, all those advances, and being site-specific on the land with those advances, I think really helped to improve the silviculture that was applied to the land over the generations there.
Right. There's a long history going back to even when the settlers came over and we started utilizing the forest for the products they produce. It just seems like normal agriculture just to try to make things better. If you compare agriculture to farming forest, basically silviculture, you can see how it has changed, but agriculture is on a lot shorter rotation. The improvement in silviculture and forestry has been a lot slower to be adopted by landowners and foresters and forest managers. Maybe we could talk a little bit about getting to kind of what is our meat of what we do at ArborGen and talk about regeneration of the forest. There's basically two types of regeneration that landowners, foresters, land managers have at their disposal. And those two types are natural regeneration, artificial regeneration. Can you touch a little bit on either one of those and the benefits that came from the adoption of artificial regen?
The natural regeneration silvicultural systems, I guess, began early on with a coppice system, which is basically just sprouting from harvested stumps. That was predominantly employed in hardwood stands. And then you had coppice with standards, which is basically a simple variation of that coppice system, allowing some of the trees to grow over several coppice rotations to allow 2 crops to be harvested from one stand. But again, it was primarily used in hardwoods. And then shelterwood systems developed where that kind of a system allowed for opening of the forest canopy in patches over a landscape scale. And those patches that were opening, that allowed for natural regeneration to occur through either sprouts or through seed trees. And as we moved forward with that, then in the 50s, a lot of pine natural regeneration occurred, and there were 2 systems out there, the uneven age system of natural regeneration and then the even age system of natural regeneration. It was widely employed throughout the Southeast. And those systems, natural regeneration systems, basically allowed for the creation of new stands from trees that produced the seed from mature trees, cones that fell. Those cones opened up and the seed came out of those cones, and that allowed those seed to germinate and create new seedlings, producing naturally generated stand of trees. And with uneven aged regeneration systems, what you had there, that's a process that refers to new pine trees naturally established themselves within that forest, but it created a diverse stands of varying maturity levels, different ages.
Let's talk a little bit about the natural regen and some of the issues that occur from that. I know I work with some individuals that like to use natural regeneration whenever they can. As you and I both know, you have shelter wood cuts and then you have seed tree cuts. And in pine, the seed tree cut leaves a few trees, mature trees on the stand per acre to allow the seed to form naturally and fall to the ground. But you and I both know that when that happens, you have no control over planting density. You have no control over of genetics that is growing that you're going back with the forest on, and there's some other limitations. Natural regeneration comes with a whole caveat of issues.
That's right. And with uneven age natural regeneration, that varying age class is created by successive selective harvests, With the even-age natural regeneration system, you referred to seed trees. That's where you're cutting the majority of the stand,
Hmm.
but you're leaving maybe 10 to 14 trees per acre out there as seed trees to provide that seed source. But when you have that seed source, I guess number one, we don't have a good seed crop every year.
Right.
And it varies depending on whether it's loblolly or shortleaf, but uh, you've got different aspects with natural regeneration. With shortleaf pine, you need bare soil for that seed to germinate. With loblolly pine, that seed will germinate through 4 inches of leaf litter and duff out there. But as you related, you don't have any control over the genetics. You're going to have the parents out there that's the genetic source that you're going to get. And when you got a good seed crop, you're going to have basically a carpet of seedlings out there, thick as hair on a dog's back. And
That was the phrase I was fixing to use. The seedlings come back as thick as the hair on a dog's back. And Greg, I have visited some stands that have been seed tree cut, natural regen. You walk up to the edge of the cutting, and I'm telling you, I think if there was a timber rattler, if he had any girth to him at all, he would have trouble. The timber rattler would have trouble making it between all of the stems that are there, because we're talking about thousands per acre, several thousands per acre of
yeah,
seedling.
you're literally talking 10,000
Oh
seedlings
yeah,
per acre. And when you have that many seedlings per acre, well, number one, pine is its own worst competitor. Uh,
amen.
Pine competes harder for water and nutrients against pine more so than the hardwoods do. So when you have that many pines out there, that thick, the competition is extremely severe. And then you've got problems. Well, how do I thin it out? How do
Right.
I thin something that's that thick? And when it's that thick and it's allowed to grow, there's nothing in the understory. It's a
No,
desert in
no.
terms of food for wildlife. There's nothing out. There's no sunlight hitting the forest floor, so it's devoid of the forbs and legumes that you would need as browse for the wildlife species that you want to grow out there in addition to the timber.
Well, Greg, that's a whole different podcast that we can go down that rabbit hole on another day, because I'm telling you, I get calls about that consistently every year of how many trees per acre and everything, and wildlife issues. But you're exactly right when you say the stand will become a desert because you get that canopy closure under it. Honestly, let's look at the number one game animal in the South, white-tailed deer. If the deer has any width to his rack at all, he cannot get through that stand because the trees are too thick without getting hung up. And there's no undergrowth to feed them. So like I said, that's a different podcast. But, I think everybody can agree that natural regen, while it has its place in certain settings, is not always optimal for the health of the stand. It's not always optimal for the wildlife in the area, and it's not always optimal for the landowner that's looking to that stand for a revenue return. Even though they might have saved money by not replanting, not using reforestation, artificial reforestation, they might have saved that money, but they're still going to spend more money doing pre-commercial thinnings, lost revenue from lost timber growth because the trees are going to grow slower. Plus, the artificial regeneration is going to stress the stand that you're inviting some type of insect, southern pine beetle, to come into those stressed trees. Our good old friend, the southern pine beetle, may handle the pre-commercial thinning for you. Typically, it's not done in the grid system that we like to do a thinning in.
And with the onset of droughts, that was the natural thinning regime that used in natural regeneration.
Right. Right.
And
I'm seeing the people that I work with that have used natural regeneration in the past, or they're coming around where they're doing more and more artificial and replanting.
And I think that occurred when we saw timber companies like Georgia Pacific,
Right.
Potlatch, Deltic, and other companies, Temple Inland, the integrated forest products companies. Back in the 50s, I mean, that natural regeneration system was very popular, take out about a third of the stand every 10 years, but it was only delivering about a ton of growth per acre per year.
Hmm.
And when we transitioned into artificial regeneration systems, which involves a number of things, it could involve the broadcast spreading of seed through seed distribution systems. A lot of aerial seeding was done in the early 50s on larger acreages on a broadcast basis. And then, in addition to aerial seeding, you had the old belly grinder seeders that you'd put seed in and grind out the seed. I can tell you've done some of that, Paul.
Oh, yes. Let me interject this to you. So, a former silviculture professor at Mississippi State, when I was a student there, he always liked to pose the question to the class, if you're going to aerially seed loblolly pine onto a track via helicopter or plane, how many pounds of seed would you need to apply per acre? And of course, us as neophyte foresters, sitting in the audience, would sit there and say, we're thinking on the scale of 50, 100 pound seed per acre when you plant your food plots for deer and stuff like that. And the answer is 8. You need 8 pound of seed to cover. And of course, you and I both know these seed tree cuts, when they shed their seed in the fall, they're dumping way more than that. Thank you so much for coming on for this visit. I'm going to continue this discussion in our next episode, so stick around.